Welcome, week 3. We are spending this week learning all about unpacking standards. So, does it sound weird? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But it is a huge piece of the lesson planning process. So, ultimately, what unpacking standards is all about is each standard has a lot packed into it. It has content in it, which is things students have to know, and then it has skills in them, what students have to be able to do. And there are multiple pieces of content and skills in each and every standard. So we have to unpack them to know what it is that we're even going to teach students. There's no way that we could say, oh, I'm going to teach a lesson about standard 2 when there could be 10 to 15 things that could be unpacked from it, right? They're so chock full of stuff. So we need to practice unpacking standards. We have to learn how to do it. So hopefully you watched the other video first. So it talks about a more formal process. This is what I do, and this is how I want you to unpack standards for me and going forward for your program. Ultimately, what I want you to do is underline and have a bulleted list. So here's an example. So this is 3rd grade reading standard 2. The coding is in the standard, so hopefully you've noticed that. The standard itself is determine a theme or central idea and explain how it is supported by key details. Summarize portions of a text. So then when you see the RI and RL, this is for my ELA friends, this means reading informational text and reading literature. So fiction and nonfiction, sometimes the standard is the same. There are a few standards where they're different based on literature or informational text. So the first thing I do is underline. What are the big pieces of information here? Well, if I look at this, I see theme and central idea. They're not the same thing because there's an or. So I underline them separately. And then explain how it's supported by key details. I underline kind of the whole thing. And then summarize. Right? Those are the big things. So then what I have to do is create this bulleted list underneath that talks about what do students have to know and what do they have to be able to do to address the underlined things. So the first thing is theme. Well, they have to know what a theme is. They can't determine what it is unless they know what it is, right? And the same with central idea. Know what a central idea is. They're different, so they have to know what they are. And then it talks about them being supported by key details, so they have to know what key details are. They're not just any details, right? So not only do they have to know all about it, then they have to be able to identify the theme or central idea in a text, right? That's what it's asking. And then they have to be able to find key details that connect with that theme or central idea. Hopefully that makes sense to you so far. Then the second half of the standard has summarized portions of a text. So, well, they have to know what a summary is. And we know that when we summarize something, we have to do it concisely and we have to do it in a few words. So, restate text in own words. That could be any text. And then restate text concisely. Those are the skills involved in summarizing. So, if you think about this is 3rd grade, so it can't be spiraled backwards too much. But sometimes when you unpack things, you will have to unpack multiple layers of things. We could even say, finding key details that connect to the theme. Maybe if they can't do that, maybe they just have to work on finding key details. Not even worry about connecting it to the theme or central idea. You know what I mean? So sometimes they can be unpacked even further. You want to push to unpack it as much as you possibly can that makes the best sense, because you don't know. You're planning for imaginary students, so you want to make sure you're unpacking the standards fully. Each of these bullets, that's what you would plan a lesson around, right? Like if I know I'm working on this standard, well, tomorrow for my students, I might say, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to work on just knowing what a theme is, and I might model things that, have strong theme and point it out for them. Just one bullet. There is no way you could teach to this whole standard in one lesson, right? It has to be one of the bullets. That's why we unpack them. I hope that makes sense. Here's another one. So this is 5th grade reading standard 1. So the standard is Locate and refer to relevant details and evidence when explaining what a text says explicitly and implicitly, and make logical inferences. Okay, that's a mouthful, right? So let's look at the important stuff. I see locate and refer to. I underline them separately because I feel like they're a little bit different. Locate is like for themselves, go find it, but refer to something means like you're mentioning it when you talk to somebody else or when you're writing something. And then relevant details and evidence. That word relevant is probably pretty important. Explaining what a text says, right? And then this idea of, well, I could have done this separately, but explicit and implicit information. And then logical inferences. I know the general rule is you don't want to underline the whole thing, and you'll find sometimes when you unpack a standard, you'll underline almost the whole thing. That's okay in this situation. Don't worry about it. It just means you're going to have a longer bulleted list. So when I dug into this one, I started with this part here, the relevant details and evidence. So first of all, students have to know what relevant means, right? We don't want them to pick irrelevant details. We want relevant details. So then they have to know what details and evidence even are. Now in 5th grade, they should know what they are. You might not plan an entire lesson about this, but if you have students who are reading below grade level, you might have to do a lesson about this. That's why we unpack the standards fully. So then know what makes details or evidence relevant. So before they can even pick it out, they have to know what relevant is and what makes something relevant, right? Then they can identify relevant details and evidence when explaining what they've read. Then we get into this part here. Know what explicit versus implicit is. What does that even mean? Then be able to connect, again, relevant details and evidence to explicit information and then implicit information in a text, right? And then we get to the inferences. Well, they have to know what that means to infer. What's an inference? And then if you notice, it has the word logical, that you can make illogical inferences. So they have to know what makes an inference logical, and then they can make a logical inference based on what they've read. Make sense? So again, you couldn't possibly teach one lesson around this entire standard. You would pick one of the bullets below to teach to. That's the whole point of unpacking standards. So let me model for you unpacking one in the moment. So actually, let me make this a little bit bigger. Hold, please. Where is my... I feel like I'm not seeing something. To make it bigger, and it's probably like super obvious. No, that's not it. Yeah, okay. Well, then we'll keep it small, I guess. So, let me put some bullets in here. So, the standard is 2nd grade standard reading, standard 5. Describe the overall structure of a text, including describing how the beginning introduces the text and the ending concludes the text. So think about that for a minute. What are the important things here that students either have to know or be able to do? Well, I'm seeing structure of a text structure, they have to know what that is, right? Then they have to know that the beginning of a text introduces it and the ending concludes it. See how I got that? You could underline describe. That is a skill that they have to do or have to be able to do. I feel like you're going to get at that anyway, whether you underline it or not. So personally, I would underline it. So if I look at the first underline thing, structure of a text, well, they have to know that that's a thing. Like texts are structured in a specific way, right? It's really going to annoy me that my bullets here are, there we go. Then if we think about, all right, so that they know that they are structured, then they have to know what the different text structures are. Like for fiction, how it's cause and effect, problem solution, sequential, things like that. So they have to know the different types of text structure, right? Then they have to be able to identify the structure of a text. Makes sense, right? See what I mean? 3 bullets just for one little piece. Crazy, right? So, the next thing, that the beginning introduces the text. Well, let's keep in mind this is 2nd grade. So, they have to know what the beginning, maybe not what, where, what the beginning of the story is. Oh, it's not a story, a text. Sorry. And then know what the ending of a text is. They kind of have to know, well, it would probably fall in this one, knowing that the beginning of a text is like what you start with and the end is what you end with. I'll leave that one alone. So then they have to know what introducing something means, and know what concluding something means. Right? You have to know what it means first. So then students can describe how the beginning of the text introduces it, and describe how the end of the text concludes it. Does that make sense? I hope. Let's do one more. We'll do an 8th grade one here because we've been very elementary so far. So 8th grade reading standard 3. In informational texts, analyze how individuals, events, and ideas are introduced, relate to each other, and are developed. See, here's an example of this is just the reading for informational text. There's an RL one for this. So I would underline here analyze, because analyzing takes a bunch of different skills, right? And then it's how individuals, events, and ideas. I group that together, how they're introduced. Then how they relate to each other. I'll just underline relate. And how they're developed. So we've got quite a list here. So if we were going to make a list here, I'm going to skip analyze for now. I'm going to individuals, events, and ideas are introduced. So for the sake of ease, these 3 things, they're different, but I'm just going to call them stuff. And I'm going to put it in quotation marks. So they have to know that stuff gets introduced in the text, right? Oops. Oh my goodness. They have to know that, you don't just, events don't just start happening. Something gets introduced, right? And I'm very, very formal saying stuff, but whatever. I don't want to type out all 3. So they have to know that happens. Know that stuff gets introduced in the text. And then they have to be able to probably first identify where the stuff gets introduced. And then analyzing it means looking really deeply into it, right? So how about we say, I'm going to put analyze here for now. Analyze how the author introduces, oh my gosh, this stuff. Hopefully that makes sense to you. This is going to bug me again. Okay, so then we can look at relate. Well, they have to tell how stuff relates to each other. And then the last one, developed, tell how the stuff is developed over the course of the text. Makes sense? You could tease it out for each of these 3 things, but it's the same process, hence my using of stuff. So I hope that makes sense to you. At the end of the week, you've got the Unpacked Standard Graphic Organizer assignment. You're going to have 2 opportunities to practice unpacking and then giving each other feedback. So you don't have to worry. You'll have plenty of more practice before that. You're going to essentially do the exact same thing that I just did. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions or come prepared to class with those.